blanket design I am naming Sasha, and I'm going to come straight out of the bat and tell you that it is a reversible design. I've had loads of people ask when I produce the blanket if it's reversible, so I thought it was about time that I produced another reversible blanket for you. So if I flip what I like to think of as the right side over, you can see that the wrong side is almost identical to the right side. So this blanket is truly reversible. It's a 20 row repeat. But the beauty of this blanket is it's just blocks of either stockinette stitch or reverse stockinette stitch. So if you are a beginner who knows how to purl and knows how to knit, then you can make this blanket, and the fact that there is no pattern to remember across your rows makes it the perfect project for you to start with. To knit a blanket like mine, 60 centimeters wide and 80 centimeters long, you are going to need about 400 grams of double knit yarn. For those of you outside the UK, that is light worsted weight or 3-weight yarn. In terms of meterage, you're looking between 1,000 and 1,200 meters. You are also going to need some 4mm circular needles. You want them to be at least 100 centimeters long so that you can accommodate all your stitches onto these needles. You are also going to need some embroidery scissors and a tapestry needle to sort out your ends when you change ball and finish off your project. And then last but not least, you are going to need 2 stitch markers. We just use these to mark where our side borders start and end, which just makes that transition into the textured panel so much easier to recognise when you're knitting. The beauty with this pattern is there is no pattern multiple, so you can cast on as many or as few stitches as you like. Without even counting your stitches, you can just cast onto a certain width and this pattern will work. For the blanket that you saw in the introduction, I cast on a total of 136 stitches, but for this tutorial I'm just going to cast on a very small sample of 45 stitches. I like to use the long tail cast on method for all of my blankets. It's my preferred method, but if you have a method that you prefer, you can use that one to cast on your blanket. It really doesn't matter. This blanket is worked all in one piece from bottom to top, so the first part of the blanket that we need to tackle is our bottom garter stitch border. That consists of 15 rows worked in exactly the same way. All of our stitches, with the exception of the final stitch in the row, are all knit stitches. The final stitch of every row is our selvage stitch, and we work that slightly differently just to give us a really lovely clean edge up the sides of our blankets that looks almost like a little braid. So you want to knit your way all the way across your row until you have just one stitch left to work, and that is the point that I will rejoin you. We are going to slip this final stitch in the row purlwise with the yarn in front. This will give us a really nice neat edge all the way up the long sides of your blanket. So to start with, you want to pop your yarn to the front of your work however you prefer. I like to just hold it with my right hand needle, but if you like to lift it all the way to the front of your work, you can do that. That is not a problem at all. Then we are going to pop the right hand needle into that final stitch from right through to left, so as if you are going to purl the stitch. What you don't want to do is go into it as if you are going to knit the stitch. Slide it all the way so that it is firmly on this right hand needle, and once you've done that, you can take your left hand needle out of the stitch. And then if you have held your yarn at the back of your work, don't forget to lift it over so that it's definitely at the front of your work, because otherwise when you turn your work to start knitting your next row, you are going to accidentally create a new stitch. So that's row 1 of 15, and I'm going to leave you to carry on and work the next 14 rows in exactly the same way. Once you've done that, I will rejoin you and show you how to knit that middle textured panel that forms the main bulk of our blanket. Once you've worked your 15 rows, it's time to jump into our 20 row repeat. Now with this particular repeat, there is a lot of repetition, so rather than going through all 20 rows individually, I will show you a block of a couple of rows and then tell you how many times to repeat those 2 rows until you need to come back and look at what we next need to do within the repeat. So the first time we work row 1, we're going to do a little bit of setup work just to mark these side borders, but every time you work row 1 after that, you are going to just slip the markers instead of placing them. Now, as I said in the introduction, This blanket doesn't really have a right and wrong side, but I do like to class the side that starts with a stockinette block as opposed to a reverse stockinette block as the right side of the work. So that is the side that you will see me refer to as the right side of the work. Row 1 is a right side row, and that means that your right side will face you as you knit, and that is the same for all of our odd numbered rows in this repeat. Start row 1 by knitting 9 stitches. Once you've knit those 9 stitches, you are going to grab the first of your 2 stitch markers and just pop that onto your right hand needle. Next, you want to knit all the way across until you have 9 stitches left to work until the end of your row. So that would be when you have 9 stitches left to work on your left hand needle. At that point, you want to grab your second stitch marker, and again, just like with the first one, you're going to pop it onto that right hand needle, and then you want to carry on and knit 8 stitches. That should leave you with just 1 stitch left to work, and that is our selvage stitch. Just like with our selvage stitch on our bottom garter stitch edge, you want to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front, and that completes row 1. Row 2 starts by knitting until you hit that first stitch marker, which should be after 9 stitches. You're going to slip the marker over from your left needle to your right needle, and then you want to purl all the way across until you hit your second marker. Once again, just like with row 1, once you hit that second marker, you want to slip it over from your left needle to your right needle, and you want to carry on and knit the next 8 stitches. And then for your selvage stitch, you are going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. For rows 3 up to and including row 8, you are going to repeat row 1 and row 2 3 more times. So that means you will go row 1, row 2, row 1, row 2, row 1, row 2 until you have worked 8 rows. So rows 3 all the way up to and including row 8 are repeating row 1 and 2 3 times. I will join you at the beginning of row 9 to explain what you do next. This is what your work should look like after those first 8 rows, and the next set of rows that we are going to tackle are again worked in exactly the same way, and they are rows 9 up to and including row 12. So 9, 10, 11 and 12 all worked in exactly the same way. You are going to knit your way across, knitting every single stitch with the exception of that final stitch in the row, which is the selvage stitch. You are going to slip your markers over from your left needle to your right needle as you come across them, and then for that very last stitch of the row, you are going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front to maintain that really nice neat selvage that we've got so far. So you're going to do this for a total of 4 rows, and the rows in the repeat that we're working currently are 9, 10, 11 and 12, and then I will meet you just as we are about to start row 13 and we can tackle the next block of stitches together. Row 13, you want to start by knitting the 9 stitches that take you to your first stitch marker. Slip the marker over from your left needle to your right needle, and then you want to purl all the way across until you hit that second marker. So every stitch between the 2 markers is a purl stitch. Slip the second marker over from left needle to right needle as you come to it, and then knit the next 8 stitches. That should then leave you with your selvage stitch at the end of the row, and you're going to slip that purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 14 is really simple. You are going to knit every single stitch in the row with the exception of that very final stitch. You want to make sure that you slip your stitch markers over from your left needle to your right needle as you've hit them, and then to finish off your row for that final stitch, just like with every other final stitch so far in the pattern, you are going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. For rows 15 all the way up to and including row 18, you want to repeat rows 13 and 14 twice more. So just like we did with this stockinette section here, you are going to alternate rows 13 and 14 in order twice more. So for rows 15 and 16 and rows 17 and 18. I will meet you at the beginning of row 19. Row 19 and row 20 are the last two rows of our repeat, and they are worked in exactly the same way as each other. So you are going to knit all the way across your row. Don't forget that as you hit your stitch markers, you want to slip them over from your left needle to your right needle. And then to finish the row, instead of knitting that final stitch, you want to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. So you want to do this process for both row 19 and for row 20. These 20 rows form the building blocks of your blanket, and it's this block of 20 rows that you would repeat as many times as you want to until your project is about 6 centimeters shorter than you want your overall length to be. In the case of my blanket that I showed you in the introduction, I worked these 20 rows a total of 12 times, so including the first repeat, I'd now go on and work 11 more. And then before moving on to the top garter stitch edging, because I like my blankets to be symmetrical top and bottom, I worked rows 1 to 9 once more. So I will go away and work rows 1 to 9 once more on this little sample, and then I'll come back and we can tackle that top garter stitch border together. Your top garter stitch border is worked in exactly the same way as the bottom garter stitch border, so that it's 15 rows worked in exactly the same way. You are going to knit your way across your rows, and on the first row that you work, you can get rid of your stitch markers because we don't need those to mark our side borders anymore now that we've moved on to the top garter stitch border. And just like with the other rows that involve just knit stitches, you want to knit your way across, and then the only stitch that is worked in any different way is the last stitch of the row, and that one is slipped purlwise with the yarn in front. So that's row 1 of 15 done. I will leave you to work the next 14 rows, and the next point that I will rejoin you in this video is when we are ready to cast off and get this blanket off our needles and into a finished object. The very last row of any blanket project like this one is going to be your cast off row, and for all of my blankets I like to use a really basic knitted cast off. I do have a beginner friendly video that goes over it in really small steps if you are new to this cast off, but for this video I'm just going to show you how to work the first few stitches, and then I'll leave you to carry on the rest of the row. To start your cast off row, you want to knit the first 2 stitches. And then what you want to do is grab your left hand needle and pop it into the first stitch that you knitted from left through to right, and then lift it up and over the other stitch that is on your needle, and then right off your needle like that. So you have gone from 2 stitches on your needle down to 1 stitch. Then you're going to knit 1 more stitch so that you go back up to 2 stitches on this right hand needle, and then you're going to repeat that process of lifting the first stitch over the second stitch. You might find it useful to keep your finger on the stitch just so that it doesn't accidentally come off the right hand needle as well. And then you're going to repeat that all the way along your row, so knit 1 and lift 1 until you have just 1 stitch left on your right hand needle and no stitches left to work on this left hand needle. The golden rule is that you should never have more than 2 stitches at any one time on this right hand needle, otherwise the cast off will not work. So if you carry on and knit the rest of your row, I will meet you when we have just 1 stitch left on our right hand needle and no stitches left on our left hand needle, and I will show you how to finish off the row. Once you're down to just this 1 stitch on your right hand needle, you can break your yarn because you don't need your yarn anymore. You want to make sure that you leave a long enough tail so that you've got enough yarn to securely sew in your end onto the back of your blanket. And then one final step I like to take just to nice and firmly secure this final stitch is to lift up to make it a bit bigger. Then you can get rid of your knitting needles because we don't need those anymore. Then pop your finger and thumb through the loop, grab the yarn tail and pull it all the way through, and then pull to tighten, and that gives you a nice secure stitch that you can then take your tail and sew in your ends. Before I go, let me just cover the usual final bits and bobs. As I said in the beginning of this video, this blanket is a reversible pattern, so the back and front look virtually identical. That being said, because we are using stockinette stitch and reverse stockinette stitch, it has a tendency to want to bunch up depending on the type of yarn you use. I use Stylecraft Bambino for this blanket, and the lightweight nature of the yarn just means that it wants to bunch up a little bit more than some of the other yarns that I often use. So this blanket does benefit from a light blocking. Wet the blanket, pin it out on blocking mats if you have them, and let it dry. If you don't have blocking mats, wet the blanket, lay it out on a flat surface on top of a towel. The fibres of the towel will hold the blanket nice and still, and you can just let it dry, and it will stretch all of these stitches nice and flat for you. I do have a free written pattern on my website for this blanket if you like to have written instructions to follow along to, and if you want something to print off and take away with you, then I do also have an ad-free PDF that you can purchase so that you can keep it handy with you without having to sit in front of a screen. That's all from me for today, but I'll leave you with a link to another one of my blankets that just happens to be reversible as well.